Yes, welcome in. Badgers getting ready for a visit from South Dakota this coming Saturday. Kick is going to be at 2:30. I don't know if you saw this or not, Jesse, but it looks like it's going to be football weather. It's supposed to
I'm
be
all about football weather, man.
supposed
We
to be
get
like
that a lot this time of year.
supposed to be like 60, a high of 60 on Saturday. Could be a nice day. Could be a nice day. We'll see if Wisconsin is able to put together a more convincing effort than maybe they did against Western Michigan. Before we get going here, as always, Home Field is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They are the best retro gear you can find for college athletics. And it's not just Wisconsin. They got pretty much every college is now covered, but they have these new coaches jackets that they just put out last week that are absolutely amazing. And you can find more information about those and buy them up on homefield.com. If you use the code Bucky24, you get 15% off your first purchase. So, again, as I said, Wisconsin getting ready for South Dakota. Before we look ahead to South Dakota, Jesse, though, I wanted to get a little, clean up here on week one, some week one questions that popped up. And I guess we can start with some of the formations that we saw on Saturday, or excuse me, on Friday. There was a whole lot more 12 personnel on Saturday, or excuse me, on Friday than we normally saw last year. I think you said the numbers, that's about 26% of 12 personnel, which for anybody that doesn't know what that means, that's two tight ends. It's one running back, two tight ends. I was a little bit, I thought in the moment that it was a lot. And then we tried to bring it up on the show I think we did it on Sunday, and we didn't have the numbers in front of us, so we didn't do it. But you found the numbers. It's a pretty healthy percentage, more so than it was a year ago overall.
I've got my trusty notebook with some of the numbers of the formation since I figured that might be helpful. 12 personnel. This is according to True Media. The Wisconsin ran it 26.8% of the time on its offensive plays in week one compared to 6.6% last season. So it was a substantial difference. And I think there's a couple key reasons for why Wisconsin would have done that. First of all, let's remember what happened a year ago. They lost Jack Eschenbach and Clay Cundiff before the season, and then that essentially forced Tucker Ashcraft as a true freshman into action. Riley Nowakowski was dealing with an injury, and they had Hayden Rucci. So I think they were still trying to figure out what would work best a year ago and weren't all that comfortable with multiple tight ends, which was reflected in the personnel packages last year. And now they know they like what they have in Riley Nowakowski and Tucker Ashcraft. Both of them are healthy. Ashcraft has a year under his belt. And then the other layer here is what Luke Fickell talked about. They wanted to establish the run. They wanted to be more physical. So those guys were in situations where they were trying to be physical up front. And I should mention, we also saw some 3 tight end sets where they threw JT Seagreaves in there. So that was something a little bit different as well. Not to the same ratio of the 2 tight end sets, but I think those are a couple of reasons we saw some changes. But overall, it was really interesting, some of the personnel changes they made from a formation standpoint in week one.
And again, who knows if that's what it's going to look like. I think obviously the opponent affects it, but I mean, we did think that there was going to be more of a chance that they're going to spread things out. I don't know that we talked about the tight ends being such a huge part of the offense. We know that Phil Longo likes to use tight ends when he has one, but or when he has them. But I don't know that anything we saw in fall camp was like, oh yeah, they need to get those guys involved. And especially when you consider some of what we think that maybe the depth at wide receiver is, or at least we did. I don't know if we still do. I guess we'll see. But the depth at wide receiver was a strength. And for them to go as much to that. And again, 11 personnel was still by far their most used personnel grouping. That has always been the case under Phil Longo. You go back to, I think North Carolina was close to 80, if not over 85%, maybe his last year there. So it is a change, and we'll see if that continues on Saturday against South Dakota. I was a little caught off guard by it, though, I'll admit.
Yeah, and of course, when you have a high percentage of a different formation grouping, it changes the ratio for everything else. And so, I mean, yes, 11 personnel is still going to be the bread and butter. They still ran that a lot, but for the opener, it was 52.4% of the time. In 11 personnel, and a year ago, it was 68.4%. So some of those plays are going to the 2 tight end sets. A couple of them went to 3 tight end sets. A couple of them went to the 3 running back sets, which we never saw. And here's another thing that I would throw out there is I think this will be a theme throughout the year. More 2 running back sets. So 8.5% of the plays were 20 personnel. And a year ago, 0.5% of the plays were multiple running backs on the field because you had either Braylon or you had Ches. And then Ches got hurt and you kind of rode with Braylon. And so I think those are some notable changes here. And we saw some of that in preseason, but you just didn't necessarily know what that was going to look like when you had a full game package put together.
Perhaps this is where maybe we should talk about one of those running backs, Cade Giacomelli, who, again, kind of like Jackson Aker for a large portion of the offseason, was kind of a forgotten guy, as we talked about the young guys. We talked about Ches coming back. We talked about Tui. We talked about Dylan Jones and Darian Dupree and the excitement around those guys. But Cade Giacomelli, and I don't know if this was just intentional because they wanted to make Ches and Tui co-starters. But when they did that on the depth chart on Monday, it's now Ches Malusi or Tui Walker. Walker started the game against Western Michigan. Ches obviously got more carries, but the third guy was Cade Giacomelli. And I think I agree with Luke Fickell when he said he just looks different and runs different than he did last year.
Yeah, Luke had a lot of praise for Cade, talked about the fact that he's on 3 different special teams. And we saw Tui got hurt early in that game. They didn't know what his availability was going to be like the rest of the way. And obviously he was able to come back. But if he was not able to do that, then Cade would have been the next man up, which really shows, I think, how far he's come, because I would have guessed at a certain point that maybe Jackson Aker would have been the third guy, but Cade gives them something a little bit different. He's got really good speed. I remember him as a high school player. He was extremely versatile. He was one of those guys who could play everything. And if I'm not mistaken, was actually evaluated at 3 different positions when he came to Wisconsin's camp, one as a defensive player, but also wide receiver, I think, and running back. So he gives them a little bit something different. And though he didn't get a ton of carries, showed part of what he can offer in week 1.
Yeah, it looks like Jackson Aker, his role on at least last Friday was as a pass blocker, as the guy that was coming in on third down and providing, some help there. We'll see if that changes, but they just have so many guys that could play. And the 2 guys that we desperately wanted to see obviously didn't have an opportunity to get out there because of the game and the way it played out. But I think that I guess we'll see what happens this weekend. After last week, I'm not making any grand assumptions about what this game is going to look like, because certainly didn't see the Western Michigan game playing out the way it did. And I guess we'll have a discussion about how the South Dakota game plays out and whether we get to see those guys when we get together on Sunday. There were some other questions, though, coming out of week 1 that Luke Fickell gave a little bit of an insight in, and that was including Brandon Lane along the defensive line. Wisconsin wasn't on the field a ton the other night, so it's a little bit difficult, but he didn't play. We saw, obviously, Ben Barton. We saw Kurt Neal. They were the starters, but then we also saw a ton of Cade McDonald. We saw a ton of Elijah Hills and even a little bit of Dylan Johnson, but we did not see Brandon Lane. And Luke Fickell was asked about that on Monday.
And what he said is he's got to play. He's got to play more. But I thought that was curious in week 1, and I'm not exactly sure what the rationale was. And what Luke said in part was, look, there were only 3 series for each team in the first half, which is more reminiscent of an NFL game than what you would see in college. And so that the guys came off the field and they weren't tired. But if you're going to have a rotation, you're going to have a rotation. Now, Luke said moving forward, they need to be able to play those 3 reserves: Elijah Hills, Brandon Lane, Dylan Johnson. I would have thought we would have seen some snaps. And I thought Brandon did enough in the preseason to warrant them, which is also what Luke said. But you kind of, you could say one thing, but your actions say another. So I think I would expect to see him moving forward, but it's kind of hard to know, well, what exactly is his role and where would he fit in? Because if you're putting Dylan Johnson in first, then is he number 4 or number 5? I guess we'll have to find out.
We will. I thought he made enough plays for sure to to see time. But again, they are the ones that have seen practice the last couple of weeks. We have not, and exactly how that all plays out. I think that same thing may go on the offensive side of the ball with some of the wide receivers that we didn't see the other night. Obviously, Joseph Griffin didn't even dress. Tyrell Henry was essentially played special teams, but the there's just some interesting things. The other thing on the depth chart, Quincy Burrows no longer listed on the depth chart, obviously because he is dealing with an injury and did not even suit up the other day. Hakan Anderson, I'm pretty sure that's not how you say it, but Hakan Anderson, the senior, is now in the 2 deep for the first time ever. He always does little things that kind of stand out to you at times in practice. Like he'll make a great catch here and there, but you just never expect him to actually see time in a game that is still in question. And I don't know that has changed for me either, though. Like just because he's the 2 there.
It wouldn't for me either. I mean, look, we know what the top group is. You know, Bryson Green, Will Pauling, Tretch Kahuna in there, and then Vinny Anthony and CJ Williams came close to splitting snaps. It wasn't exactly a 50-50 split. We saw very little of Chris Brooks Jr., and I don't think they go beyond that at this point. Having said that, hey, we've seen a lot of football over the years where somebody gets hurt and someone else gets thrown into a role. And I think Anderson, one of those guys who, when you're watching practice, continues to make plays. We know Kenny Guyton has a lot of trust in him. Kenny's the reason that he's on scholarship, was just impressed enough with him to do that, which says a lot. But yeah, you even if you're on the 2 deep, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to play, given the rotations you want to have in a game.
He is a big body, that's for sure. He's a bigger guy, so can be of use in other ways. But he's also a special teams guy, and I think that role will continue. One of the other questions we got a ton of when I asked for questions for Sunday show was about Phil Longo still signaling in plays, and I'm like, yeah, that is a good question. And then I asked it, and I felt very stupid as soon as I asked it, because it makes complete sense why Phil Longo is still signaling in plays, despite the fact that Tyler Van Dyke has the communication device in his helmet. And that's because nobody else has that communication device in their helmet, and they don't huddle. So how would you get the play from Tyler to them, other than him, like, then either telling them or like it's just not going to work. You're not having guys come back to the huddle. So it doesn't make a ton of sense. And they still are signaling in plays defensively as well, because when it's a hurry up offense, you don't have a chance to huddle there either. So I think all that makes sense. The NFL obviously is a little bit different because most teams do huddle and you're able to get the play. And that's why you don't see signaling in from the NFL, but the college is going to continue to do that. And I felt, there are a lot of things that make me feel stupid. That was one of them that certainly made me feel stupid. I know Luke Fickell wanted to be like, are you an idiot? Do you know college football? Have you watched college football? He held himself back, though. That was impressive restraint on his part. But as soon as I asked it, as soon as he said it, like, I'm like, why did I not think of that? That makes complete and total sense. So we will continue to see Phil Longo signaling in plays. And while he is able to talk to Tyler, right? So he is talking to him, and he's able to tell him stuff, and then he can make adjustments with his wide receivers. But the play overall, everyone's looking over the sideline to see what it is. So you knew that, of course, right?
I hadn't really spent that much time thinking about it, but it was a good explanation. And the other thing is, what happens when it cuts off or whatever? Like, then you're screwed. Yeah, and so you can't just be completely reliant on that. And I thought it was also interesting in Luke's answer, though, that he said he talked to the people that he knows in the NFL, right, about what does this look like, and they all said the same thing. Like, okay, that can be a part of what you want to do, but you can't rely on that. What if you get into, you're right, a hurry up situation, a 2-minute situation? That's absolute disaster if you put all your eggs in one basket and then you can't rely on it.
Right, and in the NFL, it has cut off at times. Certain stadiums, maybe it happened in certain stadiums, maybe more than others. The Patriots, potentially, it cut off for the visiting team once or twice. I think eventually the NFL is like, if it cuts off for the the visiting team, we're cutting it off for the home team as well. And I think all of a sudden those problems started to not happen nearly as much. So that was another question. And then I know I know you're going to be writing about it, but Aaron Witt and his impact on this team. Um, I think we mentioned it on Sunday, but he lost his mom last week, and he didn't want to leave the team. He wanted to be with the team, and I think that kind of speaks to who he is and everything that he's fought through to get back to where he is, and how much that means to him. But that kid's been hit by some. We talk about adversity, and usually we're talking about like the on-field kind of adversity. But him and Amari Snowden, both of them losing their moms here in the last couple of weeks, that's true adversity. And having to try and play and try and go to school and do all that stuff, I guess I gain even more admiration for Aaron and what he's been through, not just physically, but now mentally as well.
Yeah, it's been an unbelievable journey for him at Wisconsin. We remember him in the Duke's Mayo Bowl in 2020 and looked like he was headed for such a promising career, and then was derailed by injuries for 2 years, 3 years, until he finally got on the field last fall. And then he got hurt in the preseason, well, in the spring and the preseason, with different injuries. And you just wondered, what is this going to look like? Is he going to get his shot? Well, we saw him out there in the opener, making a big play, a key stop on the 4th and 1 at midfield, and doing so 5 days after he lost his mom to a 2.5-year battle with cancer. Look, I've got respect for all of these players because they're putting a lot on the line in front of 80,000 people and dedicating their lives to it. But certainly another level for Aaron and everything that he's persevered through. And Luke talked about the fact that, you don't even necessarily have to know everything about his story to understand the passion that he has for this place, for football, for being around these teammates. And so the older guys who have been with him for 4 or 5 years know, but even the younger guys who may not know, see how other people respond to him and see how he shows up every day. And that's certainly noteworthy.
It definitely is. So when he talked after the game on Friday, and I didn't get over there in enough time to actually know that he had lost his mother. I believe he talked about that with a number of other reporters, but he was still in his full uniform, and no one else, like they don't come to, they change, they take a shower, they do all that stuff. He was still in full uniform, still had the black eye stuff on, on his face. And I'm like, you just don't want to take it off. He's like, oh no, I had to go see my family. And now I just felt again, couple of times feeling stupid, just being like, oh, he just loves football so much that he's still in his uniform. But obviously he's dealing with something pretty tough on a number of different levels. But his impact certainly on the team is felt, and we saw it on the field as well, right? Like what he was able to do on the 4th down play. And I asked Hunter Wolder about it, and he was just effusive in his praise for him as a player, because it's not just the fact that he's been through. He's actually a pretty good player. Like, he's got the strength. He's got certainly the mind to it. And they need him to stay healthy. They need that body on the field.
Yeah, so they do. You see the physicality, and especially in the run game, he provides something different.
He does. All right. Let's get into everyone's favorite, overreaction or no. And for anybody that is new to the show, I'm gonna have a statement. I'm gonna say a statement, or I'm gonna say something, and then is that an overreaction or no? And for anybody that's wondering, what do you mean overreaction or no? Well, if you're from Wisconsin, you have heard someone say, "Are you going to the mall or no? Are you gonna go to class tomorrow or no?" Well, for whatever reason, we just throw or no at the end of everything, and I'm guilty of that. Jesse's not from Wisconsin, so he doesn't do it nearly as much. Probably not at all. I do it all the time. And so that's where this segment comes from. And we're going to start with this one, Jesse. Do you remember how to play the game?
Yes, I believe so. It's been a while, but it's in the back of my head.
Okay, good. Overreaction or no? This team is terrible. They won't even make a bowl game. Is that an overreaction or no?
That's an overreaction. But
which
man,
part? Said which part? Because I mean, you could say it's an overreaction to say the team is terrible, but they won't even make a bowl game. That one might be not as overreaction, but your answer first.
Well, this is interesting because we did a story at The Athletic that ran Tuesday morning it was basically, here's a mailbag submission for all the readers who are Big Ten fans. Give us your absolute most scorching takes, and then we'll rank them 1 to 10 on the ones that seem most plausible. And there was a hilarious one that I responded to where somebody said, Wisconsin will go 4-8. Chris McIntosh will force Luke Fickell to make changes at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Luke will leave for Washington State. Jake Dickert will be hired by the Badgers. And of course, it was preposterous. But the one part of that I really had to think about was 4-8. I don't see it getting that bad, though I have seen fans certainly overreact to that degree. But let's be honest, when we did our preseason predictions, I said Wisconsin would go 7-5. It's hard to feel like the 5 losses that I had on there are that I feel better about them now. USC looked really good in beating LSU. Obviously, Iowa scored more than 25 points, which might be a holiday in the state. And you've still got the other teams that are challenging, the Penn States, the Oregons, which didn't look great, and Alabama, obviously. But Rutgers and Nebraska look pretty darn good. And I don't know that you can call those games locks where you've got to go on the road there. So if that's the case, then, you could be looking at a situation where it's a fight for bowl eligibility. So week 1 is all about overreactions, but like they might be on the cusp there.
So it's an overreaction this week. It may not be an overreaction next week.
It's an overreaction that they're like a terrible football team, but look, I can't help but look at the schedule and say, well, where are these automatic 6 wins going to come from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've already got 1, so you just need to find 5 more. Overreaction or no, 28 points against a MAC opponent. This version of the air raid can't work at Wisconsin. Overreaction or no?
That's an overreaction to me. Yes, we are all prisoners of the moment in week 1. I think if you're looking for optimism, you've got to think about the first 4 drives and the way that they at least strung some plays together. It's a lot of ifs. If Nathaniel Vakos makes the first field goal, if they can get a touchdown on another drive, then it looks a little bit different. I think this can work. You need the personnel and you need the execution.
At what point will you say it can't work?
If they go an entire second season and it looks like it did, either in week 1 or in year 1. I mean, look, if they averaged 24 points a game or something like that, and it's not markedly better than it was in year 1, 2 years is a pretty decent sample size. And you have to wonder, well, what is that going to look like? And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we're 1 game into the season, but you're asking the question, what is that going to look like in 2025? Is Braden Locke your starting quarterback? What are your weapons? And so, yeah, I think this entire year is a really important year, very clearly for the future of this offense and what Phil Longo can do.
Do you know the last time Wisconsin scored 40 points?
Oh man. I want to say 2020.
No, it has not been that. It's not been that bad. The last time they scored 40 plus was the week after Paul Chris got fired, when they went down Northwestern had I think they won 41-7 or something like that. That's the last time that they have scored 40 points. Only Minnesota's gone longer in the Big Ten without scoring 40 points. Everyone else has scored it, and most of them, not most of them, but a lot of them this past weekend. Right? Illinois, Iowa, Maryland, Nebraska, Ohio State, Purdue, Rutgers. All of them scored 40 plus this weekend. Wisconsin hasn't done it in close to 2 years. That can't happen. You just can't go that long without it. And I thought this past weekend they had an opportunity to do it, and they just didn't get the explosive plays. Again, they moved the ball between the 20s as well as I think they did at any point last year consistently, right? I mean, you said it yourself. When's the last time they had 2 16-play drives? It's been at least since 2010. I think I saw that stat from UW. My guess is it's probably gone back further than that, but they had 3 was it 3 or 4 double-digit number drives? It was 16, 16, 14. What was that? Or was that it?
Well, then they had the 14 to open the third quarter. So all 3 drives they had in the first half went 16, 16, 14. And I think I mentioned this on the Sunday show, but the fact they had 4 drives of 14 plus plays, I believe they had 3 all of last season of 14 plus. And you can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing with this type of offense, but at the very least, you're stringing some successes together. And so that's not nothing.
Right. It's just you want to be explosive, and they were not explosive. So obviously that is a bit of an issue. All right, overreaction or no? Watch Tretch. He's electric. He should get the same number of snaps as Will Pauling. Is that an overreaction or no?
So that's an overreaction. I asked Luke a question specifically about Tretch, and because you look at the snap counts, Tretch had 17 snaps, and when he's in there, you feel some of that electricity. He had 3 catches. He had the 2-point conversion catch. But Luke, as this is understandable from a coach's perspective, what's the first thing he mentioned? Dude has to take care of the ball. He fumbled. Wisconsin was fortunate to recover it, but I think we saw that in practices, especially like as a return man. I remember the special teams scrimmage, which is the last one of the spring. He had a fumble on a return. So, but here's the phrase, the most cliched phrase in football that I especially remember from every running backs coach ever is ball security, is job security. If he can shore that up, and I don't know why he couldn't, especially if it's an emphasis, then he deserves more snaps. And I would argue, look, he's not going to match Pauling in terms of number of snaps, but he's one of those guys out there who is explosive enough that I think he should warrant more than 17. And part of this is situational too, which is what Luke mentioned. Like if they're going to try and be physical, run the ball, you're not necessarily going to have Tretch out there for that.
I understand the idea of trying to be physical and run the ball, but get the ball to your best playmakers and let them go do what they do. That's what Phil Longo has routinely said. Stretch them horizontally, stretch them vertically, get the ball in the hands of your athletes and let them go do their thing. And Tretch needs to be in that discussion. I will say the fumble, you put that on tape in week 1, people are just going to be hammering at that thing this coming weekend and going forward. You just put that on tape and people get into their mind. And it's not like they wouldn't already, but I think there's just going to be a little extra oomph behind it because of it already happening, that guys are going to be shooting for it. So unfortunate for him. That said, I want him on the field as much as possible. Do I want him on the field more than Will Pauling? No, but I'd like it to be close. I mean, honestly, I'd like to see them both on the field together more often. The only problem is they play similar positions and essentially the same position. But we'll see. If you have that's your job as an offensive coordinator. That's your job as a coaching staff to figure out a way to get your best players on the field at the same time. And those two guys, I think, playmaking wise, are certainly their best two on offense right now at this point. All right, so this one's a little bit different. Andy Schaff, good follow on Twitter. He put this out there because I think it was off of Jim Polzine's story about the lack of playmakers and this tweet. So is this tweet an overreaction? The decision to go all in with the portal at wide receiver is killing them. They hit with Pauling, but Green, C.J. Williams, Griffin, Henry, Burrows, etc. haven't shown much. Loading up with transfers meant they took just one receiver in the 23 class, that was Tretch, and one in the 2024 class, that was Kyan Barry Johnson. Alternative strategy would have been bringing the Cincy guys, keeping DK, Bell, Lewis, and etc., hitting high school recruiting harder. Is that an overreaction or no?
I'm inclined to say it's a slight overreaction. I think Bryson Green, has he been 100 yards a game type guy? No. I mean, he did have 4 catches in the opener. He had 100 plus yards in the bowl game. I would put him at a level above the rest of the people in that conversation. The Quincy Burrows one is interesting because if he's not hurt, I think he's playing. Based on what we saw in practices, he had the potential to be, I don't know. I felt like he had the potential to be more of an impact playmaker than what we saw out of Vinny Anthony and CJ Williams, to be honest with you. So that's just unfortunate. The ones that make you scratch your head a little bit are the Tyrell Henry and the Joseph Griffin one, because those guys had success at their previous schools from a number standpoint and just are not in the mix at all. The retaining players is a tough one because look, Keontae Lewis was number 6 a year ago. I know he put up pretty good numbers the year before in a different system. I guess if you bring in transfers, then it runs the risk of pushing returning guys out. But what does that say if he wasn't even in the top 5? I don't know. And like Skylar Bell had his limitations, even though he had 38 catches a year ago, had a lot of drops. And so maybe some of that had to do with like he switched positions. They moved him into the slot. He was on the outside, but they're also coming in and running a different system, a different offense that requires a different type of skill set. So I don't necessarily have a problem with them going the transfer portal route. And some of those guys I think would be in better position, but I think this is what the risk you run though, because you're essentially throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping that enough of them stick. The developing of high school wide receivers, it can also be a bit of a crapshoot too. I think they got good ones though. And I don't know. I think the other thing I'm thinking of is just like it's easy to. I know Will Pauling is included in that where you hit, but like that's a massive hit. So what does this look like if you don't have somebody like him? So it's just like high school recruiting. The transfer portal it can be high risk, high reward, but I don't necessarily fault the overall strategy.
Yeah, the idea was to bring the two Cincy guys with you and then hold on to the other ones. So Will obviously would have been a part of that, but they needed numbers. And, if they had just done that, they would have had 9 scholarship receivers last year. And I know that they ended up only playing a certain number of those guys, but you need numbers. You can't simply, this is not the 2 and, sometimes 3 wide receiver sets that Paul was running and was 5 at most. There was going to be guys that were coming through. I still think if Keontez Lewis had stuck around, he may have had an impact last year. As we got into the season and saw that they had no ability to stretch the defense on the outside, that he would have gotten in there. But I understand his reasoning for leaving. I think he is now at Southern Illinois. So, congrats on that. Certainly Chimray and DK were both here last year, and neither guy was great. I would even, serviceable. Bell averaged like 7 yards a catch. And again, I know it's a new spot. That said, he went out to UConn this past week, and they lost 50-7 to, I think it was Maryland, and Nick Evers was horrible, but Skyler had over 100 yards receiving. I think it was like 140 something. He had a really good day. But those 3 were not good enough just to say, okay, we're going to stand pat with these guys. They just weren't. And you go and add a guy in Bryson Green, who was productive at Oklahoma State. You go and add a guy in CJ Williams, who was a top 10 wide receiver in the country. And certainly, the fact that he didn't play at USC as a freshman, I don't think should be necessarily held against him. Now that we have seen him for, a year plus now, it kind of makes sense. Like he has not maybe he is not that top 10 talent, but you didn't know that in the moment. You needed bodies, and you had a really good one, you thought, at that time. No one was hating that ad, right? Like there was nobody that was like, I don't think they should add CJ Williams. That's a horrible addition. So they needed to go the transfer portal way at wide receiver. I think if we're talking about questioning the strategy, I would have maybe questioned it this offseason with the additions of Tyrell Henry and Joseph Griffin. I don't know. The Griffin, like the Tyrell Henry one, didn't make a ton of sense to me. And the Griffin one, as late as it was, you thought maybe, but it wasn't like a guy that everybody else wanted either. We'll see how those two play out. It's still very, very early, but if we're going to question it, I wouldn't have questioned their all-in strategy on transfer portal last year. This year, a little bit different. Going into this year, a little bit different. But how many receivers do they have in the 25 class? Is it just Hilton? Or is there one more?
They've got their slot receiver. It's a Cameron Miller.
Yeah. So high school recruiting is like, you don't even know if you're going to get to have those guys for an extended period, right? Like the transfers, all of them had multiple years when you brought them in. Bryson Green, multiple years. CJ Williams, obviously multiple years. Will Pauling, Quincy Burrows, multiple years. So it's not like you were just getting. It's not like you do what they've done at quarterback, where you have 1 year of a guy. You have multiple years with these guys, and so they're not high school recruits, but they're also not one and done guys either. So again, I understand like the idea behind it, just because they, in hindsight, didn't necessarily hit on all these guys, and they haven't necessarily produced at the level. But that, in general, the offense in general, and then I guess maybe they're a big part of it, certainly are a big part of it. hasn't produced at the level that any of us thought they were going to. And I can't just simply blame that on wide receiver, and that's the reason it's killing them. But I'm all about high school recruiting. Like, I go after guys hard, but you have to fill in spots and you have to have bodies. And they desperately needed that last year. So, again, I respect the idea that Andy was talking about, and I'm sure, and we had a good back and forth. But they needed numbers at that spot, and so I think it makes sense as to why they went about it that way. We'll see. All right, we will be back, I should say, on Thursday. We'll look ahead to South Dakota, make our picks. You finished 4-3 last week, thanks to USC pulling out that win on Sunday night, and I went 3-4. So not a great start for either of us, but you're above 500, and that's all you can ask for, right?
It's all that matters in the betting game.
Yeah. All right. See you Thursday, Jesse. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The King.